Seriously? What the heck? Seriously? I gotta start swinging out those middle fingers and F words, and I forget where I'm at. I have a whole half an hour left to talk about this. And thank goodness, because I really didn't talk anything about what I wanted to talk about. So we are done cussing out John B. Watson. Thank you, Gina Perry, for the great work that you have done. I finished reading that section that I wanted to read about little Albert. He likely did not suffer permanent harm, would be my guess. Now, this is really debatable. I have to read more of Gina Perry's book because she also did this same kind of in-depth research study on oops. Did I take out Milgram's study? Did I really take that out? Anyway, I could find it someplace else. It doesn't even matter. So Milgram's study, right? With the, I swear to gosh, I just could not have taken that out. Could I have? I guess I could have. No, I didn't. There it is. All right. So Gina Perry also did an in-depth explanation or in-depth study on Milgram's study as well. So Stanley Milgram from Yale University did the study, if you recall, that we've got here with the shock generator. And now I have Milgram's book. If you also recall, Milgram's book did not also get, or his research also did not get published until much later after he did the research. He had to publish it in his own book for the same reasons, because that they were acting in unethical ways. Gina Perry discovers, now I don't know her from, whatever, but it seems like she is pretty credible, and she did some really hard work here. It seems like the people that she worked with, they seemed like they liked her, but those are from her own author's words. But it seems like the situation she's describing, they would like her. So it seems like she knows what she's talking about, and she really did do some pretty good research. And so what she said was that once, just like in the Lost Boys for this robber's cave, is that they didn't know anything about that they were being studied, right? And for my mystery study, this is probably no big surprise any longer, because I said I'm being studied right now. And if like people are complaining that communism owns the United States right now, or communists have probably pockets or something like that here in the United States, well, then we probably have, less of a say in whatever's going on in the information that we're getting than sometimes we may even think, right? So Milgram's study, we don't even know what they're telling us anymore. I was told that they were debriefed. Gina Perry said they weren't. It falls in line with the fact that these people weren't debriefed or even told, and the atrocity of that, of what they told the parents and how sly they were trying to be for a mother to have allowed her child to take part in this was simply just a absolute manipulation. Science was the lifeblood of Schenectady, and this is where the first, actually there was an original study, and then there was another study that was done in 1953, and then there was the study that was published over here. So the first study was somewhat successful. The second study is what Gina Perry is investigating, because all of those notes were hidden. And then, based on the first study's success, the third study was put in print, and that's the Robber's Cave. All right, so 3 studies. The third one being the Robber's Cave. The second one being the one that she's reporting on, that where all the data was hidden. So this was done by General Electric Company. So here, the college had originally owned this 30-acre tract of wooded land. In 1898, they sold it for $57,000 to General Electric. So General Electric owns this. General Electric owned the land. It was under the guise of a university, but Sharif wasn't associated. It doesn't look like, I'll have to look at that again, with the university or have the status of a university. So he got this money by pleading for grants. So pleading for one from Yale, having General Electric interested in the study. Science was the lifeblood of Schenectady. The Rockefeller Foundation also donated money under the guise that this is science, and what they are saying about this science is that, I want to see if I can get the exact words here, but basically saying that this science is looking to find out about the problems with conflict and how we can turn conflict into cooperation, which is true. It is true, but the manipulation that they did was to serve their own interest, Sharif's own interest. And so that seems to be clear about what they were doing here. So this was set at Union College, is the letter that they got from Sharif. And it said, it looks like they had to do some kind of interview. Not a problem. Doug scoffed, my mother grew up dirt poor in the South, but she was smart enough, and my father could have finagled anybody he wanted. My father would have walked into any interview and pulled it off. So they would have handled an interview very well. He thought about it for a minute. My dad, who was an extremely patriotic World War II veteran, could have been talked into sending me to something very easily, even though he was a very bright and discerning man, if he thought it was going to be advancing some patriotic concept. Manipulation number one. We're going to help figure out how we can make kids like your son be leaders. That would have appealed to his sense of patriotism. My mother, who came from a very poor background, would have been persuaded if she thought that she or the family would somehow be elevated by my attendance. But my parents were very protective. My mother, I wasn't leaving her side unless it was for something that she thought was wonderful for me. And it would have been pretty much for the same for my father, except his view would have been, okay, you can go if it's going to toughen you up a little bit. Until I was about 17, I was always the smallest kid in my class. But here's the part that still is going to trouble me and trouble me. It's 3 weeks. That's a long time for a kid to be in a situation like that. My mother, that would have been a very long time for her too. He turned to June. Can you see my mother signing off to the woods for 3 weeks, saying go off to the woods for 3 weeks? And this is his wife. No, June said, shaking her head. She was bamboozled. He leaned over and looked at the letter on June's lap. It doesn't say anything about the parents not coming up to visit. At every other camp I was ever on, every weekend the parents were there. Not only did they deliver you and pick you up, they came up for events. He shook his head. 3 weeks? So the manipulation that they were using with these parents left very bright parents with a desire for their unfortunate children, or less fortunate, and even though they were middle class, right, an opportunity to really advance. So the manipulation here is only explained, in my opinion, by such a disregard for humans at a certain class, a certain, I don't know, or is it the elevation of science, that probably a little bit of both, right? So it's such a disregard for a certain class of humans and the elevation of science to be divine, right? That this is our divine and Muzaffar Sharif's divine right, it appears, to be able to put forth this kind of self-generated, and what I mean by self-generated is, because it's filled with biases, self-generated research. So back to Milgram's over here, Milgram's study over here. the same kind of manipulation, apparently, because Gina Perry is saying that they also did not know that they were being experimented on. And again, taking a look at the Bookless classroom and the critical thinking classroom, what kind of America do you want to live in? We have really got to come to terms with what our science and medicine is based on. And what it's based on is a lot of manipulation for money-making purposes, for reasons to be a legend, for reasons to be, what's the word I'm looking for? Infamous is what they are. They're infamous, but that's not the word that I'm looking for, nor is it the word I'm looking for, famous, either. It is through time, like legendary, right? Legendary, but that wasn't the word I was thinking of necessarily either, but maybe it was. I don't know right now. Okay, where are we on time? All right, 10 more minutes. Not that I want to rush through this, but because what I want to do is, it's been hard for me to be pulling these slides that I have together, and every time I look at the slides before I come on here, I'm like, those are important slides. But they almost seem like here's a slide about this, and I really have got to pull in all of these sources, these 3 sources right here, right now. So the third source today, right? And these other sources, and then these sources, and then the sources, that I've got up there on the, am I pointing right? No, of course not. Up here that I have on my PowerPoint slides as well. All right. So now what I wanted to say here, just jumping ahead a little bit, is to talk about, which I said on Thursday or Tuesday even, I'm not sure, was to take a closer look at this public and private self. And what I would like to do again is mention the book Hyperbole and a Half by Allie Brosh, because here is a great example if you want a more, a less traditional, less scientific example. The book by Allie Brosh, Hyperbole and a Half, just gives you some really great examples of public and private self. What is this person allowed to do as a private self, what this Allie allows herself to do in her private self, compared to what she lets everybody else see? They are just 2 entirely different worlds. And there, down at the bottom right there, I have got a it's actually a measure of closeness, right? And we could use this measure of closeness to measure all kinds of closeness, right? So the closeness, originally this is used to measure the extent to which you believe that you overlap with another person. So that is some real scientific sorts of terms. What do you mean by overlap? But let's just say the relationship that you have with somebody, right? So somebody that you don't know at all, you would have a relationship as yourself being very distinct from another person. Let's go all the way to the bottom right there. So the bottom row right. But if I have great overlap with somebody, right, which I think that Allie likely has here in this book, likely has with, I think it's Duncan, I think, and other people. How much overlap do you have with your parents? How much overlap do you have with your siblings? How close are you? And what you do is you ask the subject, whatever, the person in the study, tell me how much which one of those circles there, diagrams there, combination of 2 circles there, describe your relationship with, for example, your parents, right? Or for somebody that you're married to, or your children, right? I'm going to have, for me, greater overlap. I'm going to probably have the middle one at the bottom there for my spouse. Not all the way, the ones all the way to the right. I don't have that kind of overlap even with my spouse. With nobody, I don't have that kind of overlap. But that's my opinion. Maybe you do have that kind of overlap with somebody, right? But with my child, I might have, the top third one, right? To the right. The third one going from left to right. Maybe that's with my children, or maybe it's the fourth one, the one all the way to the right on the top. I don't know. But it's a great way to describe your relationships that you have. But also let's think about that as describing ourselves compared to, for example, who we want to be, or describing overlap with public and private self. Okay? So if we take a look at who we want to be, I'm going to do that one. Then we'll do public and private self. Okay. So who am I, the self, compared to who I want to be, the other, right? Is there a lot of overlap between who I am and who I want to be, right? So yeah, I'm almost exactly who I want to. Now for me, actually, who I am and who I want to be, I would actually be on the bottom all the way to the right for that one. So when I started saying I don't know who I have an overlap with except for maybe myself. So who I am and who I want to be. But most people are not there. Most people are not there, and it takes time, right? You can't be there as a teenager. You certainly aren't who you want to be forever as a teenager. So how much overlap do you have there? Are you with who you are and who you want to be? Are they completely different as they would be with a 5-year-old? The very first one at the top there to the left. Are they starting to come together, and to what extent are they coming together? That also gives us an indication of the kind of discomfort we feel with ourselves, right? We're going to feel great discomfort if we're not where we want to be. We called that discrepancies before, discrepancies between the self and the other, basically, ourselves and who we want to be. So the greater the discrepancies, the greater the sort of emotional dysfunction we feel, or psychological dysfunction, right? Including emotional, spiritual, and intellectual dysfunction we feel when we have greater distances between who we are and who we would like to be. Finally, there I said, let's talk about public and private self. So it seems to me that, for example, Allie Brosh in her book has a great big difference between who her private self is, which is, crawling through the neighbor's, dear Jesus, honest to God, crawling through the neighbor's cat thing, which I did not know. I'm just going to tell you, I had not put that together. The hot sauce thing I put together a long time ago. That was nothing. The cat thing I did not. Until I read it. That one, until I read it. Dear Jesus. So, public and private self. There's a great example in Hyperbole and a Half of very big differences. So how would you describe your public and private self? If your private self is extremely different than your public self, so the private self in one circle and public self in the other circle, if they're extremely different, you are also going to feel uncomfortableness, just like Allie did, right? Just like Allie felt that uncomfortableness. Am I really that weird, right? Am I really that weird? Public self and private self were very different. And now how they've come together for Allie, likely that everybody's saying, I get it. You must be stalking me. I just experienced that yesterday. Holy smokes. I can't even believe that you know exactly how I'm feeling, right? So some great examples of these discrepancies and ideas for you to think about how they really would affect our functioning, right? Our everyday functioning. So discrepancies in public and private self, discrepancies in our relationships that are important to us, or discrepancies in who we are compared to who we want to be. So all of these that I'm describing are different types of psychological discrepancies. It's the reason why people, like in our critical thinking classroom, Brian could feel so horrible about himself despite his writing a book and PhD accomplishments. What happened with Brian? I'm just thinking about Allie here too, and if Allie felt that after publishing the book as well, if Allie felt that I should feel better about it and I simply don't. And as I've said, the discrepancy here is between the selves, who I feel I should be and who I feel that I really am. Self discrepancies, we call those. Okay. And they have unique outcomes as well, where you might feel sad, that would be the first outcome, and then agitated after I cannot get past this, right? I cannot bring these two circles in my life together, who I am and who I want to be. I can't bring those two circles together. So that is the feeling of lack of control that we talk about in our critical thinking classroom. Okay, all right, let me see here. So Muzafer Sherif also did this autokinetic effect, and this autokinetic effect he did in 1936. And so in 1936, which likely was probably his first experiment, knowing this creep. Sorry, Carolyn, that you were married to such a creep, but that guy was a creep. So I just want to look here if I've got the two dates. There we go, right here. 1949. So the first experiment that Sherif did on this, conducting these experiments on competition and cooperation, was in 1949. So that was after, clearly after Sherif's autokinetic effect. Now, first of all, let's explain what an autokinetic effect is. An autokinetic effect is, if you're in a dark room and you have just a point of light, if I'm looking at it, it's going to appear that that light moves, all right? That's, who even knows, Sherif, any longer, that whether or not there's even an autokinetic effect that actually, and it's probably just propaganda, probably has no autokinetic effect, but it appears as if the light moves, and that's probably just has to do with our eyes are constantly like this, right? They actually do, Look at the pictures in Allie's book. They go like this. All right. And so this is a study that demonstrates how easily we conform to the group. So autokinetic effect is, I see a point of light. How far do I think that the light moved in the dark? So this is what people do. They come in to the experiment, point of light, and then they see it, and for a period of time, and then they say, how far did the point of light move? So an inch, 2 inches, or a millimeter, whatever, however their measurements were, and that's all that they do. They see another point of light, they experiment on how far the light moved. See another point of light, they experiment on how to see how far the light moved. And they do this either individually by themselves. Actually, they do this in both conditions, individually by themselves and in groups as well. All right. And so they are reporting, what do they report in the group individually? What do they report individually? And that's what we are seeing here in row number 1. Row number 1 here that we see is, you can see in row number 1, the very first scores say individual and then group, group, group. And you can see those individual scores are spread out. Individually, we have great changes in how far we see that light move from any given time. But then we're in a group the first time, and then we're in a group the second time, and then we're in a group the third time. And what do we see? We see that our opinions of how far the light moves gets closer and closer to the group. In the second column, we started with group, 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 and then individually. When we start with group, 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 we can see even individually, the group has affected our opinion of the autokinetic effect of how far we think that light moved. And then the second one is just another set of experiments. Again, individual, then group, group, group. We see a great spacing in the individual opinions of how far the light moves, and then they all come together when I get into the group. And then again, in the second column, we've got group, 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 and then individual, and I tend to stay with the group's opinion when I started with the group. So my opinion of that autokinetic effect matches the group's opinion if I've been conditioned to respond by the group already or in a group way already, right? So that's the conditioning. Now, how do I respond? Like the group. Why? Because I was conditioned by the group. All right. So we got some classical conditioning in there. We gave the big middle finger to John B. Watson. If you don't know what I'm talking about, watch part 1 of this, right? And now I will be back here in 15 minutes to read the next 2 chapters of Goosebumps. This is the true ending of today's philosophical classroom. Thank you for joining me. I am Dr. Annette Feravich. I'm the teacher, and this is the classroom. Thanks. I will see you Thursday back here in the philosophical classroom. Thank you.